and welcome to another evening of frank conversation on Hard Copy. Coming to you from our studios in Abuja, I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. On the 27th of this month, a non-governmental organization, Human Rights Watch, released a 90-page report of the state of human trafficking in Nigeria, titled Nigeria, Anguish, Poverty Confront Trafficking Survivors. In it, they acknowledged the huge problem of trafficking that Nigeria faces, documented the steps taken so far by the Nigerian government to stem the tide, the challenges that currently persist, and made recommendations to the different governmental agencies involved on the way forward. Here are some of the highlights from the summary of their report.
The National Anti-Trafficking Agency is locking, detaining many of these survivors in shelters. And we have had this discussion with NAPTIP, but what they are doing in terms of Nigerian law, in terms of international law, is unlawful detention in these shelters. Because it's, women are locked there against their will. They are not at liberty to leave and go and come back into the shelter. And as well, they are provided with very little information or unclear information about why they are in the shelter, how long they are going to be there, and what kind of services they are going to receive when they're in the shelters. So at the end of the day, these are women who have come from an environment of being controlled. Your life is under someone, and they come back to their country and feel the same conditions. They feel like I have no control. I'm just being told what to do. I'm just being directed.
And the government of Nigeria should also look at the possibility of developing and implementing protocol for informed consent for survivors who are coming in contact with shelters or participating in other NAPTIP programs and services. Such protocols should also respect their human rights as against forcing them to take up what they are not willing to. And of course, such policies should also evaluate the operations of shelters. We encourage the government of Nigeria to also try as much as possible to implement open shelter policies while also reviewing and assessing the performance of the closed shelter systems that are currently being operated in Nigeria by the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, NAPTIP.
Or the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, NAPTIP, was displeased with the report. Now, here is a bit of the reaction of his Director General, Julie Okadonli.
After going through the report, we are bold to say that the entire report is a mere figment of the imagination of the writers, as the narratives fall below the standards in the operations of our shelters, as well as the standards for our victim support and assistance. It is important to note that the agency observes all the world's best practices in victim handling as enshrined by the Palermo Protocol, which includes that no victim shall be kept in a shelter against his or her own will. The activities in our shelters are further guided by the National Policy on Protection and Assistance to Trafficked Persons in Nigeria, a national document that has also been adopted by ECOWAS in dealing with victims of human trafficking.
Well, tonight, we speak with Ulasi, who is Director, Counseling and Rehabilitation at NAPTIP, and also in charge of the shelters, which has come under scrutiny in the HRW report. Ulasi, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, I'm sure you have heard the report. I'm sure you must have also seen the report, because your Director General says that you have read the report and it is nothing but a figment of the imagination of the writers. Now, they stated very clearly in that report what their methodology was. Do you dismiss the entire 90-page report simply based on the fact that they accused you, or they made allegations that you operate a closed shelter system?
Yes, very well. Thank you very much, Mobe. I am very, very pleased to be here today to talk about this, because Just like my Director General had said already, I believe also and strongly believe that it's just a figment of their imagination. You know, why I said this is because I challenge even you sitting down here, Mobe, you can pay a visit to, any of our shelters. We have shelters all over the Federation where our offices are located. We have 9 zonal offices scattered across the geopolitical zones in Nigeria. And we have a very, big one here in Abuja. Abuja is the headquarters of NAPTIP. And we have a standardized procedures, we utilize in dealing with victims of human trafficking. So I wonder where all this information are coming from. Did they actually verify? That is the question I keep on asking myself. And may I also say, without mincing word, that NAPTIP is a specialized law enforcement agency of Federal Republic of Nigeria. Specialized and unique because we combine the functions of law, enforcing laws as well as the function of rehabilitating victims of human trafficking.
They acknowledge that in their report.
Yes.
They address NAPTIP as one of the positive steps taken by the Nigerian government to combat trafficking in persons. They say that that Nigeria developed an anti-trafficking law that is in line with international standards. They say that the agency and the law have helped improve investigation and prosecution of trafficking in cases. These are all things stated in their report. What do you quarrel with precisely? You cannot just dismiss a report, a 90-page report, as a figment of some people's imagination when indeed they had conversations with even officers of NAPTIP.
Yes. Well, I don't know who they interviewed. But like I said before, I still challenge everybody that wants to know exactly what happens in NAPTIP to come over to pay a visit to our shelter. We will give you the opportunity to come in and see what we do. For instance, let me start by saying that if you get a victim of human trafficking, for instance, because they talked about the duration victims stay in the shelter. And if you get a victim of human trafficking, or if a victim of human trafficking comes into NAPTIP, and you just, by the wave of the hand, and say the victim should go without doing anything, what do you think you're doing? If you send that victim away just like that, that victim is liable to be re-trafficked. Because these victims, they come back so traumatized, dehumanized, brutalized, emotionally and psychologically unbalanced. So first and foremost, we take them into our shelters. And our shelters, they talk about detention, and it amazes me. Because what we have are shelters that are safe houses, where we take in this victim at first and try to stabilize them emotionally, psychologically, before you start the process of rehabilitation, which, according to what my DG had said earlier, we have a standardized process. We have a policy document that was approved by the Federal Executive Council of Nigeria. ECOWAS has already adopted it. We have the national policy, and we have the guidelines stated clearly, step-by-step processes we utilize in dealing with these victims.
Are all this within the will? Because I think that, the key word there is keeping people against their will.
Yes.
Are they all willing, the people who stay in the shelters, I mean, are they people who are willing to stay there, or do you keep them in spite? Because I think that the key word they use here is operating closed shelters.
Yes.
They talk about detaining them. They also talk about operating a closed shelter system whereby people who have been trafficked cannot come and go as they please. Do you have maybe curfews, or do you say if you leave here, no, you cannot come back? Things of the sort. Is that how it works?
Well, yes, very well and very correctly. We operate a closed shelter. And there are specific reasons why our shelter is closed. One of the major reasons why we operate a closed shelter is because we need to give those victims security. Because these traffickers, we don't know who they are. And remember that the only concrete witness you have against a trafficker usually is the victim. Okay? So we need to give these victims, when they come, adequate protection to make sure that their security is guaranteed. That is why we keep them in that closed shelter. And remember, our shelter is a place for sober reflection. It's a place we keep this victim to bring their sanity back, before any other thing. So we have every reason to protect any victim that have come to NAPTIP and make sure that his or her security is guaranteed. Because the trafficker can go to any extent to take away or to eliminate anybody that is going to come to court to witness and make him or her go behind bars.
So you have reasons.
Yes.
You have your reasons for, operating a closed shelter system, which you have admitted to. The question is, are those who are survivors of this trafficking, this system of trafficking, are they aware of your reasons? Do they cooperate with the reasons? Do they understand why you have those, because I'm going to read some excerpts here.
Yes.
First and foremost, they criticize government, what they call over-reliance on shelters as opposed to community-based services. They think that you should actually be operating some community-based services. That's one. They also say that generally women and girls were not actively engaged in decisions about their own assistance.
Yes.
Many survivors, including those in NAPTIP shelters and those participating in other reintegration programs, said they were given insufficient and unclear information about the kind of services they would receive or the status of services they were receiving, including on economic, social, and medical assistance, court cases, family tracing, and timing for reunification with families.
Yes, thank you very much. Everything we do in our shelter is usually victim-centered. And we do not do anything that is against the consent of the victim. But let me also, at this period, reiterate or say that, when people hear about human trafficking, what readily comes to mind into the mind of a lot of people is usually, girls that are taken outside Nigeria for prostitution, and most of them may be adults 18 and above. But I want to state clearly here that human trafficking has a wider dimension that is more than the external human trafficking. We have internal human trafficking, which is very, very devastating, if not more terrible than the external trafficking. And this is where you have children, underage children, as young as 8 years, 10 years, being victims.
Which we will come to. We will definitely come to the issue of internal trafficking in Nigeria, which you say is a very big problem. But I wanted to address this problem, this issues raised here by HRW, when they talk about people, women and girls not being actively engaged in their own decisions. If you heard, I think, Madam Agnes speaking there, one of those who summarized, they give highlights of the summary of the report. She said that it felt like as if these women were being directed again, just the same way they were directed when they were with the people who trafficked them in the very first place. How does it work? Do you inform the people whom are, supposed to be in rehabilitation? Of
course, we give them every information the moment they come into the shelter. And we start by assigning every victim, or each victim in the shelter is assigned to one counselor to have a one-on-one interaction with that victim. And by so doing, everything about the whole thing, the whole processes we go through in the shelter will be explained clearly to the victim, especially if you're talking about, if you have a victim that is already an adult.
Are you aware that all your officers follow the protocol and all your officers ensure that they actually inform all the victims?
Of course.
Of how long it might take, for instance, to be reunified with their families, for
Exactly.
instance?
We tell them all those. But the maximum stay in the shelter, as stipulated in our policy document, is 6 weeks. So every victim that comes into the shelter, especially the adults, because at times the little ones that are mainly victims of internal trafficking, they don't understand most of these things until you keep talking and talking. But for adults, we tell them, at the onset that the maximum duration of staying in the shelter is 6 weeks. But then there are some peculiarities. There are some differences because every victim's case is different from the other.
I'm going to, you will have time to expatiate a little more on the peculiarities and also talk about the problem of trafficking within the country than even the one on the outside. In just a moment, please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. And our guest tonight is Mrs. Ulasi, Director, Counseling and Rehabilitation at NAPTIP, and she's also in charge of the shelters at the agency. We're looking at the recent report of Human Rights Watch, which brings to the fore the plight of trafficked persons. Well, you explained something just before we went on break, but I want you to look at this. From the title of the report, they say anguish and poverty. That's the title of the report. Anguish and poverty confront trafficking survivors. Is that the fate of those who actually summoned the courage to come back to the country?
except those of them that do not have the opportunity of passing through NAPTIP. But for everybody, for every victim that has passed through NAPTIP, it is not his or her fate. And let me also say that the mission, or the major mission of our shelter operation is that, we strive to see that every victim that has passed through our shelter will leave that shelter a better person, more psychologically balanced, more prepared, to be reintegrated properly into the society, to function as a functional citizen of the country. So I don't think that allegation...
Have you been able to rate? Have you been
Yes.
able to look at those who have been through the systems of the shelter? How they are, I mean, how they're faring, especially those who have left. Because some people have reported cases of people being re-trafficked, people who have said, there is nothing to do here. We would rather go back to where it was that we came from. There have been people who have made that trip more than once to places like Libya or even to Italy. How then do you dispute this, the title of this report in the faces of things like that, and when there is when there are no hard facts to dispute a report like this?
Let me tell you, Mope, we can only do our best. And we have period, we do our rehabilitation. We have period of disengagement. Because our period of disengagement is 3 years. Like I said before, we have processes we take in rehabilitating this victim. And we go through it one after the other before we reunite. When we reunite, the counselor assigned to each victim has this duty of still monitoring, and we do family tracing. Let me even, in a nutshell, just tell you the processes we go through in this thing, because it's a standardized process that is in the policy. We have reception, identification, sheltering, health, because you have to take care of their health, everybody. Then counseling, family tracing. We do family tracing because we want to get to the nitty-gritty or the bottom line of where the victim is coming from.
The report acknowledges that you do all of that.
Yes.
The problem
and
is...
the essence of doing
the
it.
issue is the time frame, that's
Yes.
one. And then following up to ensure that these people do not continue to live in trauma, or that poverty is not... The very thing that drove them out in the first place does not continue to face them when they return.
Yes.
How do you ensure that within NAPTIP?
Well, we are not poverty alleviation agency. That is number one. Yes, we do our best to get this victim, after assessing their needs, we get to know what the victim wants to do. Most of them will tell you they don't want to go back to school, that they want to, engage in a vocation. We operate a closed shelter, but we are affiliated to a lot of open shelters. By the time we finish our processes, most of the time when it becomes a case that has to be referred, because a victim is going to learn a vocation that is going to take long, we do the referral.
You have dismissed this report saying it's a figment of their imagination, but you have admitted that you operate a closed shelter system.
Yes, we do.
Some of the things which you have talked about as things that you do, they have acknowledged in this report that you do them, but what they have criticized the fact that there is no time frame. Let me give you an example. You talk about empowering, and I think you also do that in conjunction with other partners.
Yes,
they say some survivors and service providers were critical of IAMs, as I think it was the people who help with the migration, their livelihoods training program, saying they were ineffective because most were based on group models that were unsustainable and lacked adequate follow-up. These are things inside the report as well. They also talked about the victim identification. They talked about weak systems for victim identification, currently limited to law enforcement agents and immigration officials, leaving out other actors that could help, such as health workers, educators, community leaders, church officials, labor officials, social workers, and others. These are some of the criticisms against some of the things that you currently do. If you're not open to criticism, if you're not looking critically at the report, but dismissing it as a figment of the imagination, how will you get better?
Most of the things they said, most of the things in that report are figments of their imagination. But I've already admitted.
Give me an instance.
But I've already admitted. I saw them calling it detention. Detention is different from having a safe house where you try to balance victims that are traumatized, brutalized emotionally and psychologically, where you're trying to balance them to bring them back to their, level of equilibrium so that they can, start getting counseling that will make them relax and be able to, know what next to do. So how can you call a safe house that gives all this valuable, assistance, a detention camp.
Let me quickly bring you to, because apparently that's what you have issues with. The detention has made you just dismiss the entire report, which some people will criticize. But let us look at the issue of trafficking within Nigeria. How big a problem is it? Because some people are also saying that you are now handling other issues. Like, for instance, people who are raped, I mean, victims of rape are also brought to you. And that, some people say, is outside of your mandate. But they are brought to you because they have nowhere else to go. Are you taking on more than you ought to be taking on as the agency in charge of trafficking?
Well, I don't think so. You know that right now the VAP Act is also domiciled with NAPTIP. That is Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which that rape you're talking about is inside. So I don't think we are taking more than or going outside what our mandate, is supposed to be. All of them are now attached together and are working on all of them, yes.
Okay, so how would you describe the problem of trafficking within Nigeria?
Within Nigeria, like I said before, like erroneously, a lot of people, whenever they hear human trafficking, what readily comes to mind is external trafficking, that is taking girls out of the shores of Nigeria for prostitution, exploitative, commercial sex. Yes, that is an aspect of human trafficking, but I always like to say it everywhere I talk, that we have internal human trafficking, which is as devastating, if not more terrible than the external human trafficking. And in internal trafficking, this is where you have child abuse, child labor, domestic help syndrome, because up till now, a lot of people do not know that utilizing children below the age of 18 for house help is criminalized. It is internal trafficking. And it's also in this internal trafficking that you have underage girls being used in brothels for commercial sex exploitation. They keep them there. Some other person, maybe the madam of the hotel or the oga of the hotel, is collecting money. And very unfortunately, I don't know what the society is becoming. Because recently we raided a brothel in Kubwa and Luwe, and we got children as young as 9, 10 years.
Right here in the Federal Capital Territory.
Right here in the Federal Capital Territory. 9, 10 years, 11, 12, within that age bracket, are kept in these brothels. And men are coming to sleep with them. And some other person is by the side collecting money. This is part of the reason why I'm saying that internal trafficking is as devastating as the external human trafficking.
You have also embarked on some programs to let people know the dangers of, trafficking. Would you say your messaging is changing, or I don't know, first, is your messaging changing at all? To also say that trafficking can be local, one.
Sure.
And would you say that attitudes are changing from the enlightenment program you have been doing on the various mediums that you have been doing them?
Well, the enlightenment program we are doing is all-inclusive. Because for NAPTIP, or anybody that has, worked in NAPTIP know that external, internal, there are two major dimensions of human trafficking, which are both external and internal. So in every advert or in everything we are putting out to the media now, in terms of public enlightenment, we try to, encompass all. Tell the public the fact that there is internal human trafficking. The domestic help syndrome is there. Child labor, using children in quarries and plantation, underage children, without sending them to school. Whenever a child is engaged in any chores or any job, let me call it job, that is below or above the capacity of a growing child, it is exploitation, it is child labor. And most of the children do not have the opportunity of going to school. You see those children working many hours in a day without proper...
Our attitudes changing. Our attitudes changing as a result of your enlightenment. Are you able to measure that?
Well. A lot of... But basically, what we're emphasizing now, most of our enlightenment is behavioral change communication. Moral rearmament, trying to, give out things that will make people change their perception of certain things. That is why I call it behavioral change communication. So we try a lot to galvanize all this thing and put out something that will bring about that behavioral change we're talking about.
Well,
yes.
Mrs. Ulasi, we have to thank you for coming in hard copy. We believe that this conversation will be an ongoing one, and we certainly wish you all the best as you continue to look after victims of trafficking.
Thank you.
Well, that's the program tonight, where we look forward to reading your mails and comments. Please use the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun-Yusuf. Good night.